Close your eyes for a second and picture the house where Jesus grew up. You're probably imagining a small wooden shack with a thatched roof, somewhere in a dusty village, maybe a hammer hanging on the wall, a couple of stools, a simple table. The whole thing looks like a rustic cabin from a Sunday school coloring book. That image is wrong, almost completely wrong. The house that might have sheltered the most famous family in human history wasn't made of wood at all. It was carved from solid rock, cut directly into a limestone hillside, with walls thick enough to hold a second story and a staircase chiseled from the bedrock. So what was it actually like to wake up inside that house every morning? What did the air smell like at dawn? What did you eat? What did you wear? And what did an ordinary day feel like in first century Nazareth? Let's step inside. Nazareth, roughly 4 AD. A village of maybe 200 to 400 people spread across a hillside in the lower Galilee. We know what this place looked like because of a British archaeologist named Ken Dark. In 2006, Dark got permission to dig beneath a convent in the middle of Nazareth, right across the street from the massive Church of the Annunciation. What he found down there, buried under layers of Byzantine churches and Crusader ruins, was a first-century house cut into the hillside. Pottery fragments confirmed the occupants were Jewish, and the craftsmanship was so precise, so confident, that Dark concluded it had been built by a tekton, a skilled stoneworker. That's the word the Greek Gospels use to describe Joseph's profession. Not carpenter, tekton, a builder, a man who understood rock the way a surgeon understands bone. You're standing at the edge of the settlement, and the first thing that hits you is the smell. Smoke from bread ovens drifts through the morning air, mixing with the sharp green scent of crushed olive leaves and the animal warmth of goats penned in nearby courtyards. Somewhere below you in the valley, farmers are already working the terraced fields, and you can hear the rhythmic scraping of iron tools against the chalky soil. Nazareth sits in a natural bowl of limestone hills. The terrain is uneven, rocky, sloped. That's why the houses here aren't built the way you'd expect. Nobody hired an architect. Nobody drew blueprints. Families looked at the hillside in front of them and worked with what the rock gave them. The typical approach went like this. You found a spot where the limestone could be cut, and you carved a level platform into the slope. Then you cut the rock face back to create walls. The hillside itself became the rear wall, and sometimes the side walls of your home. Where the natural rock ended, you filled in with roughly shaped stones held together with mud mortar. The roof was made of wooden beams, probably sycamore or olive wood, laid across the top, then covered with a thick layer of branches, reeds, and packed earth. The result was something halfway between a house and a cave. Cool in the brutal summer heat, warm enough in the rainy winter months, and nearly indestructible. Picture a modern apartment carved into a cliff face. That's closer to the truth than any wooden shack you've seen in a painting. The house discovered under the Sisters of Nazareth convent fits this pattern exactly. Partially hewn from rock, partially built with stone walls, incorporating a natural cave as one of its rooms. Ken Dark's excavation revealed that the structure had multiple rooms, a courtyard, and probably a roof terrace accessed by that rock-cut staircase. The size of a typical Nazareth house was not what you'd call spacious. We're talking about a main room maybe 4 meters by 5 meters, roughly the size of a mid-range hotel room. Total floor space for the entire dwelling, including storage areas and the courtyard, might have been 40 to 60 square meters. That's about 430 to 650 square feet. For comparison, the average American studio apartment is around 500 square feet. Now imagine fitting an entire extended family into that space. Because that's exactly what happened. Step through the low doorway of a tekton's house in first century Nazareth. You have to duck. The doorframe is maybe 5 feet tall, cut from a single slab of limestone. The door itself is wood, probably olive wood, hung on stone pivots set into holes carved in the threshold and the lintel. The first thing you notice inside is the darkness. There are almost no windows, maybe 1 or 2 small openings in the stone walls covered with lattice or wooden shutters. Sunlight leaks in around the doorframe and through these narrow slits, but the interior is dim, almost cave-like. Your eyes need a full minute to adjust. And then the smell registers. It's layered. Smoke from the cooking area, where embers are still glowing from the morning's bread baking. The earthy, mineral scent of limestone walls. The faintly sweet, oily smell of the clay lamp burning in its niche, fueled by olive oil pressed from trees on the hillside above the village. Those clay oil lamps are everywhere in the archaeological record. Small, round, about the size of your palm, with a pinched nozzle where a linen or flax wick burned. A full lamp gave off roughly the same light as a single candle and could burn for several hours. Archaeologists have found thousands of them across Galilee and Judea. The Jewish versions were deliberately plain, undecorated, in contrast to the ornate Roman lamps covered in images of gods and mythological scenes. Using a plain lamp was a quiet act of cultural resistance, a way of saying, "We are not them. Feel the floor under your feet." It's packed earth in most areas, beaten smooth by generations of bare and sandaled feet. The floor is cool against your skin, even in summer, because you're standing on or slightly inside the limestone bedrock. The furnishings are minimal by any modern standard. There are no chairs, no tables as we'd recognize them. Rolled-up sleeping mats are stacked against one wall. These are thin pads made of woven reed or wool, and at night the entire family unrolls them across the floor. Everyone sleeps in the same room, often side by side. A thick woolen blanket serves as both mattress pad and cover. Against another wall, large clay storage jars stand in a row. Some hold grain, wheat or barley. Others contain olive oil. Others hold dried lentils, dried figs, or salted fish. There might be a stone-carved vessel for water, the kind made from soft chalk, specifically because Jewish purity laws held that stone could not become ritually impure. Pottery could, stone could not. This is why archaeologists find so many chalk vessels at Jewish sites across Galilee. They're a cultural fingerprint, proof that the people living here were observant Jews. In the corner, there's a niche carved into the rock wall, and inside it sits that small oil lamp, its tiny flame the only artificial light in the room. Beside it, perhaps a few pieces of dried fruit set aside for the children. This is the main living space. Cooking, eating, sleeping, socializing, praying. Everything happens in this room and the courtyard just outside. Now, step out into the courtyard. This is where the house comes alive. The morning sun floods the open space, and suddenly the temperature jumps. Even in early spring, the Galilean sun is warm on your face and arms. The courtyard is the heart of domestic life in first-century Nazareth. It's roughly the size of a two-car garage, enclosed by the walls of the house on one side, a low stone wall on the others, and often shared with an extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins, all living in rooms that open onto this same central space. The first thing you see is the bread oven. It's a clay structure, dome-shaped, roughly 2 feet tall, blackened with soot. This is a tabun, and it's been burning since before dawn. The women of the household, Mary or her sisters-in-law or her mother, rose in the darkness to grind grain. And this is the part that catches everyone off guard. Grinding grain was one of the most physically demanding tasks in the ancient world. Every single day, someone in this household, usually a woman, knelt over a stone hand mill, a pair of flat basalt stones, and ground enough wheat or barley to make bread for the whole family. Archaeologists estimate this took 1 to 2 hours per day, every day, with no days off except the Sabbath. Think about that. Before any bread was baked, before anyone ate breakfast, a woman in this family had already done the equivalent of a 2-hour upper body workout grinding grain by hand. The sound of stone grinding against stone would have been one of the first sounds you heard every morning in Nazareth, drifting from courtyard to courtyard across the village. The dough was mixed with water, sometimes a bit of olive oil, maybe a pinch of salt. Leavened bread used a piece of fermented dough saved from yesterday's batch as a starter, similar to how sourdough works today. Flat, unleavened bread could be slapped directly onto the hot sides of the tabun oven and cooked in minutes. The smell of fresh bread baking in a taboon is something people describe as almost narcotic, a deep, nutty, smoky warmth that fills the entire courtyard and drifts out into the street. If you've ever smelled fresh naan or pita coming out of a tandoor oven, you're in the right neighborhood, but earthier, more mineral, because the dough is picking up flavor from the clay. Bread was the center of every meal. When we say daily bread, that's not a metaphor, it was literal. A family of 4 in 1st century Palestine consumed roughly 1,760 pounds of wheat per year. That's almost 5 pounds of grain per day, every single day. Bread wasn't a side dish, it was the plate, the fork, and the main course all at once. You tore off pieces and used them to scoop up olive oil, lentil stew, or mashed beans. But what you put on that bread tells you even more about this world than the bread itself. Let's talk about what was actually on the table, or rather, on the mat, because meals were eaten sitting cross-legged on the ground or reclining on cushions. The diet in Nazareth was plant-heavy, seasonal, and deeply shaped by Jewish dietary law. The staples were what scholars call the Mediterranean triad: grain, olives, and grapes, bread, olive oil, and wine. These 3 formed the caloric backbone of daily life. Beyond bread, the most common foods were lentils, beans, chickpeas, onions, garlic, leeks, cucumbers, and whatever fruits were in season. Figs, dates, pomegranates, grapes, almonds, and walnuts when available. Honey was the only sweetener, and it was expensive enough that most families used it sparingly. Here's how to think about the economics. A day laborer in 1st century Palestine earned about 1 denarius per day. That's the number Jesus uses in the parable of the workers in the vineyard, and it lined up with real wages. 1 denarius was a small silver coin, roughly the size of a dime, with Caesar's face on one side. In today's money, depending on how you calculate purchasing power, that's somewhere between $20 and $40. A skilled tecton like Joseph probably earned about 2 denarii per day, so maybe $40 to $80 in modern terms. A family of 4 in Palestine could survive on as little as 70 denarii per year for basic food, but that was bare subsistence, just grain, oil, and wine. No meat, no extras. That works out to roughly 1 denarius every 5 days spent purely on calories. If Joseph was earning 2 denarii per day and working most days, the family wasn't destitute. They were working class, comfortable enough to eat well by local standards, but with very little margin for error. And that margin shaped every decision about what ended up in the cooking pot. Meat was rare, not because people didn't want it, but because it was expensive and impractical. A goat or a sheep was worth far more alive, producing milk and wool, than dead on a plate. Meat was reserved for festivals, religious celebrations, and special occasions. Fish was more common, especially dried and salted fish from the Sea of Galilee, about 25 miles away. The town of Magdala, just down the road, was a major center of the dried fish industry. Now picture the evening meal, the main meal of the day. The sun is dropping behind the western hills, turning the limestone walls of the village a deep gold. The heat is finally breaking. The family gathers in the courtyard or the main room, sitting on the ground around a common bowl. The bowl is filled with a thick lentil stew flavored with garlic, cumin, and a drizzle of olive oil. There's a stack of warm flatbread on the side, a small dish of olives, dark purple and wrinkled, a few dried figs, a cup of wine diluted with water because nobody in the ancient world drank wine straight. That was considered barbaric. Everyone eats from the same bowl, using torn bread as a utensil. The father dips first, then the rest of the family. The conversation is about the day's work, the neighbor's new cistern, the price of grain at the market in Sepphoris. Sepphoris. That name matters, and we need to talk about it. Sepphoris was a city just 4 miles from Nazareth, an hour's walk, maybe less. And in the early years of the 1st century, it was one of the biggest construction projects in the entire region. When Herod the Great died in 4 BC, riots broke out across Galilee. Rebels seized Sepphoris and proclaimed their own king. The Romans burned the city to the ground and sold its inhabitants into slavery. Then Herod's son, Herod Antipas, decided to rebuild it as his new capital. Roman-style architecture, a 4,500-seat theatre, colonnaded streets, elaborate mosaics. This construction boom required enormous numbers of skilled workers, and the nearest village full of tectons was Nazareth. So imagine the morning routine: you're Joseph, or you're Jesus at 15 or 16, already learning the family trade. You wake before dawn in that dim, stone-walled room. The air is cold because Galilee winter mornings can drop to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, around 5 Celsius. You pull on a wool tunic, a heavy outer cloak, and leather sandals. You grab a cloth bundle containing your lunch, a chunk of bread, some olives, maybe a few dried figs, and you walk. Up the rocky path out of Nazareth, across the valley floor, past the olive groves and the grain terraces, toward the growing skyline of Sepphoris. Other men from the village are walking with you. The path is well worn. You can hear their sandals scraping the limestone, the low murmur of conversation, the distant bleating of goats on the hillside. By the time you arrive at the construction site, the sun is fully up, and the stone is already warming under your hands. You spend the day cutting blocks, dressing stones, hauling limestone, fitting walls together. The tools are iron chisels, wooden mallets, plumb lines made of string, and lead weights. The work is loud, dusty, and physically brutal. Limestone dust coats your skin, your hair, your lungs. A skilled worker earned about 2 denarii for a full day's labor. If Joseph worked 250 days a year, his annual income was around 500 denarii, roughly 5 to 7 times the basic food budget for a family of 4. That's not rich, but it's solidly middle class by first-century standards. But here's the cultural tension. Sepphoris was being rebuilt as a Roman city, with Roman-style entertainment and a cosmopolitan population that embraced Greek and Roman culture. Nazareth, just 4 miles away, was fiercely, stubbornly Jewish. Ken Dark's archaeological surveys found that the people on the Nazareth side of the valley actively rejected Roman cultural influence, while those closer to Sepphoris were more willing to adopt it. You walked to work every morning across a cultural fault line. You built Roman buildings with your hands, then walked home to a Jewish village where people used plain oil lamps instead of decorated Roman ones, carved their water vessels from chalk instead of using pottery, and organized their entire week around the Sabbath. That daily tension between two worlds shaped everything about life in this household. And nowhere was that Jewish identity more visible than in something you'd never expect: the way these people washed. Ritual purity was not optional for observant Jews. It wasn't just about hygiene, although hygiene was part of it. Purity was a spiritual obligation woven into every aspect of daily life. The centerpiece was the mikveh, the ritual immersion pool. Archaeologists have found dozens of mikvaot across Galilee, dating to the 1st century. A mikveh had to be filled with living water, water that hadn't been drawn by hand, but had flowed naturally from rain, a spring, or groundwater. You descended a set of stone steps, fully immersed yourself, and emerged ritually clean. Feel the water. It's cold. Galilee groundwater sits at around 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, about 13 to 15 Celsius. Cool enough to make you gasp when you go under. You hold your breath, submerge completely, and come up shivering, your skin tight and tingling. The air hits your wet body, and you feel completely awake, completely alive. This happened regularly, before the Sabbath, after contact with anything considered impure, after menstruation, after handling a dead animal. The immersion wasn't a bath in the modern sense. You washed with water beforehand. The mikveh was about spiritual renewal, a physical act that reset your relationship with the sacred. Every object in the house existed within this framework of purity and impurity. Cooking required keeping certain foods separate. Meat and dairy were never combined. Certain animals were forbidden entirely: no pork, no shellfish, no scavenger birds. The cooking corner of the courtyard with its bread oven and fire pit was organized around these rules. Mary, or whoever managed the household kitchen, was the gatekeeper of this system. That meant knowing which vessels were clean, which foods could be prepared together, when the bread oven needed to be ritually purified, and when family members needed to immerse in the mikveh. It was a full-time intellectual and logistical operation, the ancient equivalent of running a kitchen that had to comply simultaneously with health codes, dietary regulations, and religious certification, all without a manual, without labels, without written checklists. The knowledge was passed from mother to daughter, generation after generation. But one day a week, even this relentless routine ground to a halt. The Sabbath changed everything. From sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday, work stopped completely. No building, no grinding grain, no cooking, no lighting fires. The entire village went quiet. Imagine it. You've spent the week hauling limestone at Sephoris, kneading dough at 4 in the morning, mending sandals, drawing water from the village well. And then, as the sun touches the horizon on Friday evening, everything just stops. The bread for Saturday has been baked in advance. The lentil stew was prepared before sundown and kept warm. The oil lamps have been filled and lit, because you can't light a new fire once the Sabbath begins. The house glows with the soft orange light of multiple lamps, more than you'd normally use because the Sabbath is special. The family gathers. The father recites blessings over the wine and the bread. The meal is the best of the week, with extra portions and maybe even a bit of dried fish or goat cheese that you wouldn't eat on a regular Tuesday. After dinner, the family might walk to the village synagogue. This wasn't a grand building. In 1st century Nazareth, the synagogue was probably a modest stone structure, possibly even a repurposed house with stone benches along the walls and a cobblestone floor. The Torah scrolls were kept in a wooden cabinet. A local elder or visiting teacher would read from the scrolls and offer commentary. The acoustics of a small stone room meant that the reader's voice carried naturally, bouncing off the walls with a clarity that needed no amplification. 20 or 30 people sitting shoulder to shoulder on stone benches, listening to the ancient texts being read aloud in Hebrew, then explained in Aramaic, the everyday language of Galilee. This is the room where, according to the Gospel of Luke, Jesus stood up and read from the scroll of Isaiah, the synagogue in his hometown. The people listening were his neighbors, people who had watched him grow up, people who knew his father, people who had probably eaten bread baked in his family's courtyard. On the Sabbath, the village shrank to the size of a living room. Everyone knew everyone. Privacy, in the modern sense, did not exist. If you're seeing the ancient world differently than you did 10 minutes ago, hit subscribe. We do this every week, rebuilding lost worlds one room at a time. Now let's talk about the children growing up in this house. A typical family in 1st century Nazareth had between 4 and 6 children, though infant mortality meant that not all of them survived to adulthood. Scholars estimate that roughly 30% of children died before age 5. 1 in 3. That's a number that's hard to absorb from our comfortable modern vantage point, but it was the reality of a world without antibiotics, without vaccines, without any understanding of germ theory. Children were considered a blessing from God, and large families were both a source of pride and an economic necessity. More children meant more workers, more security in old age, more connections through marriage. Boys were expected to learn their father's trade starting around age 6 or 7. For Jesus, that meant working stone alongside Joseph, learning to read the grain of limestone, to swing a mallet with precision, to cut a straight edge with an iron chisel. The apprenticeship was physical, relentless, and long. By the time a boy was 12 or 13, he was doing adult work alongside grown men. Girls learned the domestic arts from their mothers, grinding grain, baking bread, spinning wool into yarn on a hand spindle, weaving fabric on a simple loom, preparing food according to the dietary laws, managing the water supply, tending the courtyard garden where herbs and small vegetables grew. Both boys and girls received religious education. The Torah was taught orally, through repetition and memorization. A boy was expected to have significant portions of scripture memorized by age 13. The synagogue provided formal instruction, but most religious education happened at home, around the dinner mat during the Sabbath, in the rhythms of daily prayer. Every morning and every evening, the household recited the Shema, the central declaration of Jewish faith. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." This prayer was as automatic as breathing. You said it when you woke up. You said it when the lamps were lit in the evening. You said it before meals. The words were written on a small scroll and placed inside a container called a mezuzah, which was affixed to the doorframe of the house. Every time you entered or left, you touched it. Religion wasn't something that happened once a week at a building, it was the operating system of the household. It determined what you ate, when you worked, how you washed, whom you could marry, and how you treated your neighbors. It was the air you breathed. Now imagine a rainy winter evening in this house. The rain in Galilee comes hard between November and March. It hammers the flat roof, seeps through the packed earth surface, and drips into the room below. Every year, families had to replaster the roof before the rainy season, spreading a new layer of clay and straw and tamping it down. Despite this, leaks were common. A proverb in the book of Proverbs compares a quarrelsome wife to a constant dripping on a rainy day, and everyone in Nazareth would have laughed at that because they knew exactly what it meant. The temperature inside the house drops. The stone walls, which kept you cool in summer, now radiate cold. The family huddles near the cooking fire, which is kept burning for warmth. The smoke rises toward the ceiling, but there's no chimney, just a vent hole in the roof or an opening above the door. The air inside is hazy, your eyes sting, and the smell of smoke permeates everything you own. This is the reality that gets left out of the paintings. Life in these houses was intimate, cramped, smoky, and communal in ways that would overwhelm anyone used to modern privacy. You could hear every cough, every whisper, every prayer. The animals, if the family kept goats or a donkey, sometimes sheltered in the lower level of the house during bad weather, and their warmth actually helped heat the space. The smell of livestock and wood smoke and damp wool was the smell of home. And yet, every new excavation tells the same story. These people were not living in squalor. The houses were thoughtfully designed, the food was nutritious and varied, the water systems were engineered with care, and the cultural life, the religious observance, the oral literature, the music, was extraordinarily rich. Nazareth wasn't a backwater. It sat 4 miles from a major construction site and Herod Antipas's capital. It had access to trade routes that connected Galilee to the Mediterranean coast, to Damascus, to Jerusalem. The people here used Roman coins, spoke Aramaic as their daily language, understood at least some Greek for commerce, and read Hebrew in the synagogue. They were multilingual, religiously literate, and connected to a network of Jewish communities that stretched across the entire Eastern Mediterranean. When the Gospel of John records someone asking, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" the question tells us 2 things. First, that some people looked down on the village, but second, and more importantly, that Nazareth was known well enough to have a reputation at all. Let's end the day. Step back inside the house one final time. The oil lamp on the wall niche is burning low. Its flame is no bigger than a fingertip, casting a warm orange circle on the rough limestone. The rest of the room is dark. Outside, the stars over Galilee are extraordinary. No electric lights for hundreds of miles in any direction, and the Milky Way stretches across the sky like a river of milk, which is, of course, exactly how it got its name. The sleeping mats are unrolled. The family lies down together, parents and children, on the beaten earth floor. The wool blankets are rough against your skin, but warm. You can hear the breathing of the people around you, the occasional rustle of someone shifting position, the distant bark of a village dog. The last thing you hear before sleep is the wind moving across the limestone hills, pushing through the olive groves, carrying the faint scent of wild thyme from the terraces above the village. This is what home sounded like 2,000 years ago. Not silence, not noise, but something in between. The sounds of a family, A village, a world that believed with absolute conviction that every day was a gift and every meal was a prayer. The house, under the Sisters of Nazareth convent, still has its rock-cut walls intact. The staircase is still there. The doorways are still visible. 2,000 years later, the stone Joseph may have shaped with his own hands is still standing. The wood is gone. The fabric is gone. The bread and the olive oil and the children's laughter, all gone. But the rock remains. And the rock tells us something that no painting, no Sunday school lesson, no Hollywood movie has ever quite captured. The people who lived in these houses were not characters in a story. They were real. They were skilled. They had calloused hands and aching backs and flour under their fingernails. They argued about money and worried about their children and looked up at the same stars we look up at tonight. The distance between their world and ours is both enormous and impossibly small. 2,000 years, and the bread still smells the same. If this video changed how you see the ancient world, you're going to want to see what we're building next. We're walking inside the temple in Jerusalem, the one Herod the Great spent 46 years constructing, a structure that covered 35 acres, roughly 25 football fields, with limestone blocks weighing as much as a fully loaded Boeing 747. We're going room by room, from the outer courts where money changers shouted their exchange rates to the Holy of Holies, the inner chamber where only one man on earth was allowed to enter once a year. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. That video drops soon.